Have you ever witnessed someone's betrayal? If so, then you have kept silent about it or told someone. We very often have to face difficult choices that will affect not our lives, but the lives of other people. And I faced such a choice. But my choice was much harder. You did a great job today, Mr. Bennett. Keep the ice pack on your knee for 30 minutes or longer if necessary. You've already taken ibuprofen and acetaminophen, so wait at least 3 hours before taking more. Yeah, I remember. When will you return? Well, today is Monday. You'll do your exercises tomorrow and I'll be back on Wednesday. Remember, we're starting an earlier schedule on Wednesday. No more late morning sessions. I'll arrive at 9, and then you'll have the rest of the day to yourself. Sounds good. Safe travels, Megs. I'll be here. Her chuckle at the end amused me. I wasn't going anywhere soon. She's pleasant enough when she's done, but a real sadist when she's working me over. 10 days ago, I underwent knee replacement surgery on my right knee. I'd heard stories about post-op physical therapy, and there was nothing appealing about it except knowing it wouldn't last forever. I thought I could tough it out through anything, as long as there was an end in sight. But apparently everyone I know has a higher pain tolerance than me. This was torture. The primary goal of undergoing physical therapy following knee replacement surgery is to achieve a minimum 90-degree bend in the knee. It may sound straightforward, but the process involves the surgeon cutting tissue, which then heals by reconnecting fibers and fusing together. However, a challenge arises as the cut segments tend to adhere to nearby structures. The purpose of physical therapy is to break these unwanted attachments, allowing the knee to regain proper function and flexibility. Consider this as you pass me a beer. As the therapist drove away, her name, in case anyone is interested, is Maggie. Despite her youth, she's skilled and lacks sympathy, understanding that pain is often a necessary part of the recovery journey. Sometimes I jokingly refer to her as the kid, considering the age gap between us. I'm 57 and she's likely in her mid-20s. My name is Henry Bennett, for whatever it's worth, and I operate a small 4-man cabinet-making shop. Yes, one of my employees is a woman, a highly proficient carpenter and cabinet maker. However, I'm traditional and prefer the term 4-man shop. I've been contemplating expanding into furniture crafting, particularly Windsor chairs, so retirement isn't on my agenda. The wear and tear from my daily activities eventually led to knee problems, culminating in the need for factory replacement parts. As I sit near my front window with my leg elevated and ice on my knee, I observe Megs driving away. My attention then shifts to Jenny Carpenter pulling into her garage across the street. The Carpenters, both in their late 20s, share an ironic surname as Chris is a carpenter by profession, striving to establish his own carpentry contracting business. They are known for their quality work, sought after by homeowners for repairs and remodels, as well as mid-sized companies needing additional talent. Chris dreams of expanding his company to become the primary contractor for new home construction, a topic we often discussed given my own experience with growing a young company. Meanwhile, Jenny, an attractive blonde, works for a prominent investment firm in the city, a fact I admire. As I ponder, they truly make a perfect couple. A black BMW pulls into her driveway, an unusual sight for our neighborhood. Even more unusual is the sight of a well-dressed man, confidently entering a neighbor's home as if he belongs there. Yet on that day, I witnessed precisely that. While I'm icing my knee, I keep an eye on Jenny's house. After 30 minutes of icing, I head to the kitchen for a sandwich. It might seem odd, but with this walker, it's a hassle to carry a plate and a drink at the same time. So I pack my sandwich in a paper bag, pour my drink into a to-go cup, stash both in the walker's basket, and head back to my chair. As I settle in, I notice the BMW is still parked outside. I still have some ice left, so I apply the ice pack to my knee while I keep an eye on my neighbor's house across the street. Time drags on. It's a long hour before the visitor finally departs. 10 minutes later, Jenny exits through the garage. I try to convince myself that there must be a reasonable explanation for what I saw. Jenny isn't the type to do anything suspicious. But sitting here, bored out of my mind, I can't shake off the unease. I wish I had a book or a puzzle to occupy my thoughts. The shop called twice with some minor queries, probably just to keep me updated. With nothing else to do, I start browsing through books on chair design, brainstorming ideas for a new line of simple, elegant chairs for our shop. In the late afternoon, I remained seated, alternating between elevating my leg and doing bending exercises, then fetching a bag of ice, all while delving into books on chair design. As I read, I sketched some design concepts, aiming for something traditional yet comfortable. As darkness fell, I glanced up and noticed Chris's truck pulling into their garage with Jenny's car already parked nearby. This reminded me of the black BMW and its impeccably dressed driver who seemed to frequent the area. Gathering my sketches and notes, I spotted Chris crossing the street toward my house. Opening the door as he approached, I welcomed him in. Struggling with my walker, I stepped back to let him in. "Chris, what brings you here?" "Well," Jenny figured, "with you recovering and unable to move around much, you might appreciate some home-cooked food. So she prepared a meal for you and sent me over to deliver it." I chuckled. "Your daughter is a gem." As we slowly made our way to the kitchen, I inquired, "What culinary delights has your lovely wife prepared for this weary soul?" "Firstly, you're not old. But I am exhausted." Despite my laughter, Chris was my first real visitor of the day, discounting Nurse Payne, and I relished the company. He placed the food on the table and began unpacking. There was a generous serving of corn chowder and ham biscuits accompanied by a fresh salad. My word, there's enough here for the both of us. "Oh no, not a chance. If I so much as nibble on it, my wife will find out and I'll be in hot water. This is all for you." I found myself smiling as I admitted, "Looks like there's enough for dinner tonight and lunch tomorrow. Please pass along my thanks to your wonderful wife." Then, I added, "Can I get you a beer before you head back home?" Chris returned my smile, acknowledging the sincerity of my gratitude. "No, she'll be expecting me. I should get going. I'll try to swing by tomorrow evening." "I'll be here. I've got nowhere to be for the next few weeks." With that, I escorted Chris to the door, shook his hand, and watched him disappear into the night. As he made his way home, I reflected on the importance of good friends and thoughtful spouses. I must be mistaken about her, I mused. She can't be like that. That night I savored my dinner and felt a sense of accomplishment with my drawings and notes, spending the evening watching TV and reading. I also went through another bag of ice before taking another ibuprofen and acetaminophen, finally retiring to bed. Tuesday passed without much excitement. I began my day with a straightforward breakfast of yogurt and granola, accompanied by a glass of orange juice. After taking ibuprofen and acetaminophen for some pain relief, I settled into my living room chair with a cup of coffee. As I waited for the medication to kick in, I sipped my coffee leisurely. Then I commenced my routine of exercising my newly purchased knee brace, knowing that pain was inevitable for progress. Starting with basic movements like leg raises and ankle rotations, I gradually progressed to reclining knee bends. Eventually, I utilized an elastic band to facilitate knee bending, pushing through the discomfort with each repetition. By the time I finished, I was breathing heavily, akin to a long-distance runner, prompting me to ice my knee for relief. While the physical exertion wasn't overly strenuous, it required considerable discipline, especially when pulling on the elastic band, knowing the ensuing pain would be intense. For the next 30 minutes, I content myself with elevating my leg and applying ice. It's not until mid-morning that I feel ready to resume my day, returning to work on the drawings I began yesterday. Seated by the window, I focus on my tasks while observing the activity outside. Neighbors come and go from their homes. Dan Williams is busy mowing his lawn, a task he takes seriously in his retirement, perhaps filling the void of fishing or golfing. The Daniels take their usual late morning stroll, and later Herb Jackson goes out for his run. The UPS truck makes its deliveries, followed by the mailman, yet nobody seems to notice me at my window. As I work and intermittently glance outside, I notice Herb walking up to the Perkins front door and letting himself in. It strikes me as odd since Jim Perkins is away on business. I continue watching, trying to focus on my work, until an hour later, when Herb exits through the back door, returns down the driveway, and heads back home. I reassure myself that I'm probably letting my imagination run wild, yet I can't shake the feeling that my neighborhood might be harboring secrets akin to those in Peyton Place. Is this what unfolds while I'm away at work each day? What exactly am I witnessing? There must be a reasonable explanation, so I attempt to push aside my concerns and concentrate on my tasks. By nightfall, I've completed my exercises 3 times, taken my pain medication as prescribed, and enjoyed the last of Jenny's corn chowder and ham biscuits. Chris is home, and I didn't see Jenny until her usual time, prompting me once again to dismiss the unsettling thoughts I've been having. Wednesday morning arrives, and Nurse Payne soon follows. I managed to squeeze in a quick breakfast and a cup of coffee before she appeared, preparing myself for the challenges ahead. She was especially tough on me today, though she assures me that my knee is progressing well and anticipates full mobility. I jest about my lack of flexibility, but she brushes it off. Offering her coffee before she leaves, she bluntly remarks, "I've tasted your coffee. It could strip furniture." I attempt to lighten the mood with a historical tidbit about cabinet makers, but she remains unimpressed, reminding me to stick to my exercises and ice application before bidding farewell until Friday. As Nurse Payne exits, I recline with an ice pack on my knee, finishing the remnants of my now cold coffee. The day unfolds much like the one before it. Dan tends to his garden, the Daniels embark on their morning stroll, and Herb Jackson pays another visit to Sally Perkins. It's like a modern-day Sodom and Gomorrah, I tell you. At lunchtime, as I'm about to make a sandwich, I notice Jenny Carpenter pulling into her garage. I lean back in my chair, and a few minutes later, the black BMW arrives, and a man in a suit enters her house. He stays for about 90 minutes, leaving me to ponder whether it's wise to mention anything to Chris, fearing I might appear foolish if I'm mistaken. I rationalize that I don't really know Jenny's family. The man could be her brother or cousin, or even Chris's relative for all I know. The rest of Wednesday passes without incident. Chris doesn't show up for the beer we planned on Tuesday, but later that Wednesday evening there's a knock at the door. Is that offer for a beer still open? Of course, grab 2 if you would. I'll meet you in the living room. We enjoyed a pleasant hour together before Chris had to leave for home. I observed him closely during that time and didn't notice any signs of unhappiness or distraction. If there was something bothering him, he didn't show it. I briefly considered asking him about BMWs or if he had any relatives who owned one, but I ultimately decided against it, thinking I wouldn't be able to bring it up naturally. So, I let the idea go. Thursday was much like Tuesday. I spent my time alternating between exercising and icing my knee, then working on my designs, taking medication, and repeating the cycle. Life was slipping into a routine of boredom and predictability. Meanwhile, Dan was perfecting the art of washing his car, the Daniels were taking their daily walk, and Herb was spending time with Sally Perkins. That old guy was having a more eventful week than I had in 2 years. I guess I should clarify my earlier remark. You see, my wife Peg passed away 2 years ago. She was not only my partner, but also my closest friend. Her death was a tragic accident caused by a distracted city truck driver running a red light. While I was told she didn't suffer, I certainly have. I keep her photograph on the table beside my chair. Our children are both busy building their own lives, as they should be, but I do feel lonely at times. They offered to stay with me during my recovery, but I assured them I would manage. Besides, Nurse Payne was here to take care of me. When I mentioned to my kids that I was prepared to be stuck at home for a few weeks and had stocked up on beer, my daughter exchanged a look with my son, and before I knew it, the fridge and freezer were overflowing. I was only joking. Friday arrived, and Mags was her usual punctual self. I had breakfast, pills, and coffee ready, so she wasted no time getting ready. She started in on me. "You're making good progress, Henry. You must be diligently doing your exercises." "If I'm progressing so quickly..." "Ouch. Why do you keep pushing me like a tough prison guard?" "Do you have experience with prison guards?" I honestly didn't know whether to laugh or curse at her sometimes. After the latest session of torture, she came back from the kitchen with an ice bag. "I know the weekend is coming, but I want you to keep up with your exercises both Saturday and Sunday." I took a deep breath and nodded. "Then I'll see you again on Monday. All right?" "All right?" "You don't sound very enthusiastic, Henry. Are you immune to my charms?" That got a small laugh out of me as I held back a response I'd regret later. "Have a good weekend, and I'll get some new locks for the door before Monday." She chuckled. "Next week we'll start using a cane and try to get you off that walker." I like the sound of that. It's a deal. That was our version of banter, and with that, she was gone. Friday unfolded much like any other day. Dan was trimming the bushes at the front of the house, the Daniels went for their walk, and Herb paid a visit to Sally Perkins. I pondered how life had fallen into such a predictable pattern when a black BMW pulled into the Carpenter driveway. I must have missed Jenny pulling into her garage. I couldn't help but wonder if they had a regular schedule for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and how long this had been going on. I made myself a sandwich, cracked open a beer, and watched quietly until the suited man departed, with Sally trailing behind him 10 minutes later. A profound sadness washed over me then. I genuinely liked Sally and Chris. They were considerate and warm, always displaying love and attentiveness toward each other. What I witnessed now seemed utterly out of character for her. I racked my brain for a plausible explanation, acknowledging that it was all mere speculation on my part, but it troubled me deeply. Over that weekend, I undertook 2 activities. I monitored whether the suit made an appearance while Chris was at home, and I began devising plans. The suit never showed up, and my plans took shape rapidly. I was consumed with worry over my contemplations. If you were to inquire whether I was confident in my actions, my response would have been, "I'm unsure." However, one thing was clear to me. Confronting Jenny with even a hint of accusation would lead to denial, casting me as an offensive old man and causing me to lose 2 friends. Confronting Chris would result in his explosive anger towards me, once again painting me as an offensive old man, and leading to the loss of 2 friends. Ignoring the situation would make it difficult for me to face Chris, pretending to be his friend while concealing the painful truth from him. The only viable solution was to guide him to discover the truth for himself and hope that my suspicions were unfounded. Over the weekend, I dedicated my time to drafting a list outlining the requirements for expanding the shop according to my plans. As I brainstormed, I considered the necessity of acquiring tables to complement the chairs. Essential elements included ample open space for maneuvering large wood pieces near the machinery and the installation of multiple 240-volt power outlets. Additionally, provisions were needed for workbenches to facilitate manual work such as fitting mortise and tenon joints, as well as clean areas designated for finishing tasks. Essentially, I concluded that doubling the current space was imperative. While sketching out various design ideas, I came to the realization that I also required extra storage space for wood, particularly for accommodating large hardwood pieces necessary for crafting tables, as opposed to the high-grade plywood typically used for cabinets. The project was growing substantially. Sunday night, I retired to bed with a sense of apprehension, aware that the impending week would likely bring challenges, perhaps even for myself. Monday morning arrived, bringing Nurse Payne with it. Familiar with the routine, I recognized progress was being made. If enduring torture meant a return to work, then let the torture commence. Nurse Payne departed, leaving me to sip my coffee and balance the ice pack on my knee once more. Attempting to focus on work proved futile. My mind wandered. Dan was mowing his lawn again, and the Daniels were out for their stroll. Jim Perkins had returned from his travels but maintained an office in town, prompting Herb to visit Sally Perkins once more. I couldn't help but ponder why individuals would remain married if they resorted to infidelity. Was it for financial stability, security, or merely a destructive habit? Perhaps it was a twisted form of amusement, injecting excitement into otherwise mundane lives. Undoubtedly, they believed they'd never face consequences. I held respect for both Herb's wife and Sally's husband. They deserved better. At noon, I observed Jenny pulling into her garage and closing the door. Shortly after, a black BMW arrived in the driveway, and I saw the man in the suit enter the carpenter's house as if he belonged there once again. My decision was made, and I knew what I had to do. An hour later, the man in the suit departed, followed by Jenny shortly after. It pained me deeply. Monday afternoon and Tuesday passed without incident as I kept myself occupied, fielding occasional calls from the shop and monitoring the neighbors. Nothing appeared to change. Wednesday morning, I witnessed Chris heading to work. Mags arrived and gave me a thorough examination, after which I sat with my ice and coffee, watching her departure. It was time. I reached for my phone and dialed Chris's number. Chris Carpenter speaking. Chris, it's Henry Bennett. How are you? Hey, Henry, I'm good. What's up? His casual tone contrasted sharply with my inner turmoil. If my suspicions were correct, there was nothing pleasant about this. I was thinking, how about we grab lunch together? I'll treat you to a sandwich and beer. I could almost hear his smile. Well, that's an offer I can't refuse. And while you're here, I want to bounce some ideas off you about expanding my shop. After a pause, Chris replied, Sure, I could swing by tonight and we can brainstorm. Then came the moment of truth. Actually, my kids are coming over tonight and I've got everything sorted out for them. I was hoping you could drop by around 11:30 or noon today. I hated deceiving him like this. Sure, why not? A change of pace sounds good. Okay, I'll come over for lunch and we can chat about the shop. Great. See you then. I felt awful. There were numerous ways this entire situation could go awry, starting with Chris calling his wife, Jenny, and the suit not meeting today, leading to Jenny spotting Chris's car in my driveway, and so forth. I was fairly certain I could feign ignorance either way, but does that not make me a coward? Unfortunately, Jenny and the suit were as predictable as all my other neighbors. Chris arrived around 11:45 and joined me in the living room. I had all my notes and sketches laid out, and after Chris fetched us each a beer from the fridge, we settled in with sandwiches, chips, and a chilled glass. It would only go downhill from there. We sat by the table near my front window, going through my list of needs. I presented him with a sketch of my current shop and began showing him designs reflecting my ideas. At 12:05, Jenny arrived home and parked in her garage. Chris briefly glanced outside with a mixture of confusion and happiness before we continued our conversation. We were deep into planning when, at 12:10, a black BMW pulled into Chris's driveway. Chris paused mid-sentence as a man in a suit exited the car and confidently walked into Chris's house as if he belonged there. I observed Chris silently, waiting as he struggled to focus on our discussion amidst his distraction. After about 10 minutes of futile attempts, Chris abruptly excused himself without explanation. He stood up, left through the front door, and crossed the street to his own house. It was strange. I could have sworn I witnessed a man entering his own home as if he no longer resided there. I pondered whether Chris might soon become my former neighbor. My window was open, and soon after that I heard chaos. There were screams. This was accompanied by the sound of furniture being thrown around. The glass shattered, and I heard heavy bangs, as it seemed to me, of chairs against the wall. Shortly after, the man ran out half-dressed, jumped into his car, and sped away. There was a silence. Time passed, and just when I started to worry that Chris might have harmed his wife, he returned to his house and then crossed the street and entered my house. He plopped down on the sofa with an absent look, saying nothing. I decided that I should wait for him to speak. In the end, he said, "She slept with him in our bed. Can you believe that? Jenny, of all people?" I stood up and handed him the rest of his beer. "Here, finish this and I'll get you another one." He swallowed it in one gulp. Deciding that he needed to talk, I asked, "Have you seen them?" He just nodded. "Are you sure it was consensual?" He replied, dumbfounded. "I heard her. She was willing to participate." Despite all my observations and planning, I didn't know what to do next, so I brought him a second beer and leaned back in my chair, ready to listen. Finally, he spoke again. "No husband should be a witness to what I saw. I would not wish such a sight on anyone. My wife was with him. She liked it." Then he looked at me and added, "When he got off her, I saw him. There's nothing special about him." I anticipated a leisurely conversation and was prepared to let my friend speak his mind freely. After a prolonged silence, I broached the topic delicately. "I heard a commotion earlier, like glass breaking and furniture being thrown. You didn't do anything you might regret, did you?" "No," he replied. Then, after a moment's pause, he added, "Well, unless you count marrying that cheating woman in the first place." Around that time, I noticed Jenny's car slowly backing out of the driveway. It seemed to hesitate before eventually driving off. "I think Jenny just left," I remarked. "Yeah, I told her to get out," Chris replied, his hands trembling and his complexion pale. I knew what I had to say next wouldn't be easy to hear, but it was necessary. "You need some time to process what just happened. It might not be the end of everything. I'm not saying it'll be simple, but I believe she cares about you. Maybe you two can work things out once you've had some time to think." His response wasn't reassuring. And then I made a grave error. Thinking that shared misery might offer solace, I blurted out, "You're not alone. Herb Jackson is spending every day at Sally Perkins's place while her husband is at work." Chris expressed his frustration with a shake of his head and muttered something quietly. Then he turned to me. "You were aware, weren't you? That's why you invited me over today. What's the deal? Does that jerk show up here like clockwork?" I attempted to stay neutral, but Chris persisted. "Well?" Reluctantly, I replied, "It seems to be Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, from what I can gather." "How long has this been going on?" Chris's anger was palpable. "Since last week and continuing into this week. I'm not sure how long it's been happening." I momentarily shifted my concern from Jenny to myself. Chris seemed defeated, his eyes filled with rage. I couldn't help but think, that's the consequence when a spouse betrays their partner. It strips away their dignity, leaving only anger in its wake. For a while, Chris's anger appeared to subside, as my friend buried his face in his hands, overcome with tears. I was filled with regret, and once again questioned whether I should have ignored the situation and let events unfold naturally. But those fools had parked his car right in front of the house where everyone could see it. What did they expect? Herb, at least, attempts to be somewhat discreet, although I no longer admire him for it. After that, there was a long, mostly silent hour as Chris nursed his second, then third beer. I tried to reassure him that whatever he chose to do was justified, while reminding him that she did love him, even if it didn't feel like it at the moment. I'm not sure how much of it he absorbed. When his phone rang, Chris informed his office that he wouldn't be in for the day, and eventually he decided to head home after I offered him to stay as long as he needed. He just shook his head, saying, "I have to confront this, sooner or later. Might as well be sooner." He left his car in my driveway and walked back to his house, a shattered man. An hour later he returned, and I served him another beer. He mentioned, "I tidied up most of the mess. There's probably still a piece of that broken mirror in the carpet." When I inquired about the broken mirror, he grinned. The guy dodged. The chair missed him and hit the mirror. In a feeble attempt to empathize, I remarked, "I'm surprised he managed to walk away unscathed." "Yeah, I do regret that. Probably for the best. You don't want to end up behind bars because of that jerk." He simply shrugged and shook his head uncertainly. We continued to drink well into the evening. I attempted to sober up by reheating some leftover pot roast while Jenny never returned home that night. Then, long after dark, Chris made the solitary journey back to his own place. On Thursday morning, Chris's car remained parked in my driveway, prompting me to call his house after an appropriate interval, hoping he might be awake and sober. Initially, there was no response, but half an hour later, he picked up explaining he had been in the shower earlier. I inquired, "Would you like to grab breakfast? I can cook or we can go out." He suggested driving, to which I asked, "Are you all right to drive?" He chuckled sadly, replying, "Yeah, I'm good. I'll be there in 10. True to his word, he arrived at my doorstep in 10 minutes. We opted for a diner in town where I sensed it was my role to listen if he wanted to talk. Considering the presence of others, we kept our conversation subdued. Jenny had called the previous night, tearfully attempting to apologize. Chris managed to keep his composure, expressing his reluctance to meet her yet. She mentioned she would be staying at her sister's until he was ready. Thereafter, I didn't hear much about their struggles. Chris would visit once or twice a week, and we'd share a few beers while he posed abstract, introspective questions about marriage. It became evident that things weren't going well. This was confirmed when a for sale sign appeared in their front yard. Chris informed me they were divorcing, expressing gratitude that they had no children. The most revealing statement he ever made about the situation was when he mentioned that Jenny had confessed during therapy that she was skilled at compartmentalizing her life, asserting that her affair had no bearing on their marriage. Chris simply shook his head, muttering, "Damn psychopath," and that concluded our conversation. However, he did discover that the affair had persisted longer than he could forgive. Witnessing their marriage dissolve was disheartening, and I often wondered if I should have ignored the situation, hoping Jenny would come to her senses and Chris would remain unaware. Yet I always found myself contemplating how I would feel if I were in Chris's shoes, and each time I concluded that I would despise the friend who concealed such a secret from me. Eventually, Jenny and Chris parted ways through divorce. It took Chris years to trust another woman, but when he did, it seemed he chose wisely. He met a widow of his age with young children who understood the importance of fidelity. Chris had always desired children and embraced fatherhood effortlessly. Our friendship endured, and he even constructed an addition onto my shop. As for myself, I never entered into another marriage. I mentioned earlier that my wife passed away 2 years prior to my knee surgery. She embodied everything I desired in a partner, and her absence is still keenly felt. I decided that one marriage was sufficient and avoided tempting fate thereafter. Nevertheless, I maintain a few casual relationships with women who harbor no expectations of commitment, are beyond childbearing age, and still enjoy occasional companionship with a man. Menopause has its advantages. With a fulfilling job, wonderful children, and companionship when desired, I find life to be quite satisfying. However, life took a downturn for Herbert Jackson. It was approximately 2 weeks after Chris caught his wife with that man in a suit. I was seated by my front window, steadily recovering with the aid of a cane, alternating between my office and home. While I wasn't yet prepared for full-time work on the shop floor, I was gradually making progress. Engrossed in reviewing drawings for kitchen remodeling projects and preparing quotes, I suddenly heard the unmistakable sounds of glass shattering and furniture crashing against walls. Glancing over at the Perkins residence, I witnessed a startled Herb Jackson darting out of his house, unclothed, clutching his pants, pursued closely by Jim Perkins wielding a baseball bat. I thought to myself, got another one. Jim seemed very determined, and I estimated Herb's odds of making it home to be no more than 50-50. I never discovered who informed Jim Perkins, but I have a hunch it could have been a disgruntled carpenter from the neighborhood. A week later, I was back on the factory floor, staying late, and feeling grateful that I wasn't stuck anymore at my front window, observing my neighbor's dramas in my own personal Peyton place.